Meeting, I ask you to please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance. Seated. Has the board had a chance to read the minutes from the October 16th meeting?
Yes,
Can I have a motion?
I make that motion.
That's you. Is there a question? Any questions?
Yes.
Sandy?
Mr. Cottagio and I were not at that meeting, so I think all the I's need to be changed to Bobino in the votes.
Yes, I agree.
Any other questions on the minutes?
No.
Make a motion to accept the minutes as amended?
I make the motion.
Second? All in favor?
Aye.
There we go. First item on the agenda tonight, CVPM, public hearing for various site plan amendments and special permit to include personal service use in an existing structure, the old TD Bank. Said property is located at 252-260 Route 32 in Central Valley. It is known as the Village of Woodbury Tax Map Sections 230, Block 7, Lot 17, 18, and 19.
Very nice. Good evening, Steve Esposito, representing the applicant. We're here tonight to amend a previously approved site plan and special use permit for the existing mixed-use building, which was currently under construction, and also part of that original application is the, or what we refer to as the TD Bank. The mixed-use building is an 8,600 square foot mixed commercial use. The original approved uses for that structure were restaurant, 1,400 square feet, 7,100 square feet of mixed commercial, office, retail. And then also in the TD Bank, which was 2,400 square feet, was also designated as office retail, not knowing, what the marketplace what the market would bear. We assign those uses to the structures to, calculate certain things like parking, water use, trip generation, sewer, what have you. We currently have an application, or the application currently before you is to include another permitted use in the zone. It's a special use, or it's a service use, and what the applicant wants to do is occupy the building with a children's playground area. So, and also to include an additional 360 square feet of space, so the total space for the TD Bank would be 2,760 square feet. The addition of the 360 square feet would require 2 additional parking spaces, and we are proposing to bank those 2 parking spaces as well. The original approval required 80 spaces, parking spaces. We provided a parking analysis to show that we could share parking, reduce the number of parking spaces, compared to what the code requires, and we are required to install 66 spaces, bank 5 spaces, and then also the board granted a 9-space waiver to reduce the parking. With the addition of the 360 square feet, now the required parking is 82 spaces, and we're suggesting that we bank the additional 2 spaces required. Still install the 66 spaces and ask for and then land bank 7 additional spaces and ask for the waiver of 9 spaces. And I think that's it.
Does the board have any questions for the applicant?
Yes.
Go ahead.
Steve, are there going to be any after-school programs? I know the hours are supposed to be 10 to 6, so.
Yeah, well, there's a little bit about the use. So the hours of operation are going to be, give me a second, from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m., with the peak uses on the weekday, somewhere around 3 p.m. to 6 p.m., and then on the weekends, because that's usually what correlates with the school, and then also on the weekday or on the weekend, the peak uses would be from 1 to 6. It's geared towards children from 2 years old to 8 years old. There will be, there's program. Well, I shouldn't say programs. There's, opportunities for birthday parties, parties, that type of stuff, and it's as well as walk-ins. Everything has to be booked, prior to online. So you set up an appointment, and again, you could arrange for either birthday parties or just.
I guess that's why I'm asking. Is there going to be any consideration for like an expansion into an after-school group, or where buses could be moving through that parking lot to drop kids off? Or is it always going to be parent accompanied?
You have to be accompanied with a parent or a guardian.
Okay, all the way
To the end, yes, yeah.
What were I know the applicant said, I didn't write it down. What were the maximum number of reservations he was willing?
25.
Steve, as far as snow, what are you going to do as far as snow removal? Usually what happens with snow, parking spaces are, taken up by the snow banks and so forth. I mean, is there a plan to remove the snow, especially on days that there may not be school and later on the roads clear up and, parents want to bring their children down there?
Well, obviously, they've got to maintain the parking lot. They're obligated to do that, and sidewalks. We do have a large area in the back here. If you recall, the parking lot is relatively high. There's a bank that goes down, so there's, volume-wise, there's quite a bit of volume there to store snow. If it's a terrible year, they may have to truck some snow out, but we feel confident that that area can provide substantial snow storage.
Okay, thank you.
Any members from the board have any other questions? Dennis?
Yes. Well, first off, you know that this is an approved plan in general, and it is under construction. The applicant has proposed some changes. The primary one is the use change for the structure, but they've also made some other changes. We've taken a look at those. Most of them are minor changes, regard some modest elevation changes, a catch basin that they install, a new roof leader drainage. The principal item, though, is this change in the use of the old TD Bank building. We took a look at the parking, and I'll defer to John for the specifics on that, but we did note to you that 82 spaces are required, and I think Steve went over some of this. Right now you have paved and striped parking for 66 spaces. They provided area for 73. Meaning that they land bank some spaces, and the land bank spaces are 7 spaces, and you've waived 9 spaces in the previous review. When they did a calculation on the number of spaces required and look at the peaks, because the peaks are off peaks at some occasions, their revised analysis indicates 69 spaces are required to meet their peak day demand, and they have 66 spaces shown. So we think that you might want to consider whether they should take some of those land bank spaces that they have in available space and at least meet the maximum day demand. John may have more to offer on that, but that's one issue that I think you should consider. We listed all of the site plan changes. Most of them are minor in nature, other than this change in the use and the parking requirements. In terms of appearance and in terms of the access to the property, in the front of the structure, they have a number of steps because of the grade change in the front. One is at grade, and the others, now they've shown a number of steps leading into the building. ADA access is provided from the rear where the parking lot is, and in the front there'll be some steps. You could provide unrestricted access on Main Street, but you'd have to do it through a series of switchbacks and ramps and that sort of thing. And aesthetically, that may not be what you want to have since there is access through the rear area. Just wanted to note that for you. And that's primarily it, unless you have any questions of me.
Anybody have any questions for Dennis? John? Oh, sorry.
I just have one. Oh, it's not working.
There it is right now.
Just on, next to TD Bank, the exit, did we agree that the exit is only a right turn only?
We were going to leave that up to the DOT, but
Well-
our suggestion was a right turn only out
But
going out.
I'm saying, as a board here, we have the right to make that decision, and knowing the traffic, I'm concerned about making a left-hand turn on 32.
It was always a concern, the left turn coming out of that driveway, and we were pushing them to the town road instead of the state highway in order to make a right coming out of the other driveway and then making a left at the signal. That would be the preferred left. So the short answer to your question is yes, we would encourage the state to prohibit it only to right turn out.
So then I would direct my question to our attorney. Can we make as a condition, if the board agrees with me, that there's a lot of traffic and it's a right turn only, and we need to make that very clear on the exit?
Yes.
Yeah, again, I don't know if the board is agreeing with me, but we've talked about it numerous times, and
I like those kind of answers, yes or
I'm
no.
concerned about the, okay,
Very dramatic answer.
okay.
You noted that buildup, right?
Yeah, it was. It was good build-up. John?
My issue is basically a personal service, and the reason is it can vary all over the map. And my point is not so much with respect to what's required by the ordinance, but I'm concerned whether or not the waiver should still be appropriate because of the type of use. For example, we're talking about children with guardians or parents having to accompany them. And I'm looking at a little bit more detail in the narrative to specify what, in fact, will be the operation of this particular facility. I'm not opposed to the type of facility, but I think it's to make sure that in the narrative there is sufficient documentation as to the hours of operation, the maximum capacity of the building, number of children, you've indicated 25, Steve. Will there be additional staff in addition to the parents, or is it open? My major concern is the fact is that on a weekend, if we have a birthday party, can I have two birthday parties back to back? And the reason that back to back is normally what happens after the first party's over, the parents tend to linger with the children, talk to each other, et cetera, while the other party is still moving in. So I have almost a double demand for the parking. So from part of the narrative, and what I'm suggesting is that there be a separation from the end of one to the beginning of the next one, but that all should be documented to make sure that the board knows exactly how this facility is going to operate and what the actual parking demand will be for each of the various time frames. And that's my concern with respect to this. If the applicant was providing 82 spaces on site, that meets the ordinance. There's no waiver, no land banking. That's the ordinance. But since we're talking about a waiver, land banking, et cetera, I think we need more specificity about the operation of this facility.
Rick? Rick? I have a question for Rick. Would this board be allowed to remove the waiver now that the application's back in front of us?
Yes.
Thank you.
No, I mean, the waiver will deal with another issue dealing with a variance, and that the property owner has the right to. But with respect to the waiver issue, that's something that the board waived based upon certain circumstances at the time. It may well be apt to continue that waiver, or it may not, as John has noted, that given different circumstances, different use, that the waiver is no longer appropriate.
Thank you. All right, Steve.
If I could, I would like to talk a little bit about the use and the parking and how we got where we are today and where we think we're going. Like I said, we did a parking analysis on the original application. The peak, it was a 1 hour peak in the day, 1 day a year. It was 66 spaces. On the weekday and on the weekend, I believe it was 64 spaces. There was and in that analysis, there was a bar chart that showed the peaks, what time of day the peak hit, and when it declined. And in our analysis, we said that there is no standard parking information for this type of use out in the market. But the applicant, in her experience, she thinks that the maximum peak parking demand, our peak, is going to be about approximately 20 cars. That includes staff. If I could just show you, we had a chart on the previously submitted report that showed the demands, peak demand throughout the day of parking, starting at 6 a.m., ending at 12 a.m. And again, on our site, we're proposing restaurant, office, retail, and then we also have the 4 one-bedroom apartments upstairs and the 4 two-bedroom apartments upstairs. So on the blue represents the weekday peak, and the red represents the weekend peak. And again, the peak on the site with the other uses is around 12 o'clock in the afternoon. Our peak starts during the weekday around 3 p.m. and on the weekend a little earlier, around 2 p.m. So as our peak is starting to come up, the peak in the other parking demand starts to go down. So let's say at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on a weekday, there's going to be a demand for parking for 45 spaces. That's a peak demand of 45 spaces, assuming that everything's 100% occupied. So there's that, and then if you add our 20 spaces on top of that, we're at 65 spaces. We have 66 spaces, plus there's 3 additional off-street parking spaces right in front of the bank, and there's also a municipal parking lot across the street about 100 feet down. And same thing if you look at the peak on weekends, at 2 o'clock, we're looking at about 41, 42 cars at max peak for the other uses. If you add our 20 spaces on top of that, we're still below the 66 spaces. We think that what we're proposing is adequate. We wouldn't want to entertain this endeavor without be able to park the required cars. We would look at possibly, we can look at installing now some of the land bank spaces, if the board would feel more comfortable with those. But our parking analysis still holds true from our position in using our peak for 20 for the proposed use. We think that the parking still will be adequate.
My concern with that is the fact is that, leaving the 20 space aside, I'm looking at what happens if I have 2 parties occurring, one ending and one beginning. And then what happens, the 20 spaces now becomes 40 spaces. Because I have the first party ending and the second party beginning. So the demand is not just 20, which was based upon the use for the 25 children plus the parents, et cetera. It's the double use. That's why I'm suggesting the board should have some kind of a narrative or a timetable that specifies, for example, if one party, there has to be an hour separation from the end of one party and beginning of the next party. Because what happens is, it's like going to an exercise class. You have 2 different classes, especially on weekends. One runs from 7 to 8, and the next one runs from 8 to 9. Well, the people from the 7 to 8 are still parked when the other people are arriving for the next class. And that's what I'm concerned about, and that's a real problem with personal services. So all we're trying to do is establish what the criteria is for this approval, and then if everything is appropriate and the parking analysis works out, then everything's fine. I just want to make sure that that information is clear.
In addition to that, we're talking about 20 spaces where it's 25 plus employees as the buffer. So the land bank sounds like it needs to be.
Well, I think the land bank, you know, whether the number of spaces are 20 or 25, that's not the critical issue. The critical issue, I think, is when I have the doubling of the two concurrent at the same time. That's what I'm concerned about.
That's where the time.
And that's where the time penalties, the emptying of the parking lot of the first 20 or 25, and then the other arrival of the next one.
Well, I'm sure the applicant would be more than happy to put in a condition in the approval that they've got a space, any event 30 minutes apart.
As long as we have it documented,
Right.
it's timetable, that's
And I
fine.
think that's more than, it's, more, it's a limited time, limited day for them, but I think a 30-minute period.
And this also applies if, for example, if instead of being a children's play area, the special services also allow exercises. So if it's a change of use in the future, there should still be a separation, so we're still covered.
Good evening. So my name is Alicia Andrushkevich. I'm the applicant for the space. And in regards to your concern, I mean, the way these kind of places operate is when, let's say, parties are booked on the weekend for all the hours of operation, there is a break, at least of half an hour in between, which gives time for people to leave and also allows the employees to clean up and set up for another event. I mean, it wouldn't work if we have party back to back and it's just like a mess is left over from the previous event. So yes, there will be time in between events where people have time to leave, and also there is enough time to set up for another event.
I don't disagree with you on that. What happens is it's not part of the record, and that's all I want to make sure is that
Okay.
it's part of the record. So we need a more detailed narrative saying what the operation is,
Right.
how many staff, how many children at capacity,
Right.
and then the separation. And as you said, is it a half hour, is it 45 minutes? I think that's incidental, but I think it's a matter of,
Right.
for the board to recognize the fact that this is the operation and this is what plans to occur.
Okay, I just wanted to come out with clarity.
All I want to do is, it's not
Okay.
part of the record, I just want to make sure it's
Right.
part of the record.
Okay, perfect, thank you.
No, I'm good.
Anybody in the first row wishing to speak to this application? That's it. When you step up to the podium, please address the board. First name, last name, and where you're from, please.
Hi, Jerry Cassessa from Highland Mills. I just wanted to clarify something. There's not 20 additional spaces because the building always had spaces in the beginning, so your 45 count. What is the delta between?
6.
6. So we're talking about 6 additional spaces for this use?
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
Anybody else in the first row? Anybody in the second row? Anybody in the third row? Anybody against the back wall, side of the room? Anybody in the room at all? Only once, twice, 3 times. Make a motion to close the public hearing.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, so I think John wants, and the board is looking for a little bit more detail and narrative so we can move forward and have it all part of the record. And we'll get you, once we get that from you, we'll get you back on the
Great.
schedule.
Okay, thank you very much.
Now that we've closed the public hearing, though, there is a deadline on completion. So, Steve, you think you'll be ready to submit materials, maybe not for the next meeting, but within 2 weeks so that we can get it on the meeting after?
We're under construction, so we really want to get this thing, the bookkeeping stuff straightened out and cleaned up so we can move forward. So there's some urgency on our end. We will have the materials to you by the end of the week.
I'd still, Steve, request a waiver of that time frame for determination, because otherwise, if we get up to that determination, the board will have to deny it because they don't have the information
that's
that
fine.
they need. All right, so you'll waive the...
We're waiving, yeah, consider it waived.
Thank
Are
you.
there two open items left on that site though, with regards to the left turn and the steps, or no?
Well, the left turn would be part of whatever, if we decide to make it part of the resolution with the, with the additional use.
If I could just talk about the left turn for a while, and we did spend a lot of time on that, and both our consultants and your consultant. We've also had the DOT weigh in on that, and there's documentation from the DOT stating that in their opinion, it wasn't required. Because of the improvements that the state recently installed over the past couple of years, signalizing for the signalization at Estrada and Route 32. And also as part of our mitigation that was required by the department, we're putting in a, what are we putting, one of those, something for the signal. So,
John? I saw a camera on top of the light Estrada and also Smith Clove Road. Is that adaptive system?
Well, that's part of the modules that the state asked them
to put in.
asked them to help them in cooperation.
It seems to be working much more responsibly, responding to the cars. So it must be functioning now, right?
Until it goes wrong, and it'll take 2 years to get fixed again.
You're right, though. There was a drainage and a step issue. We spoke about they wanted to make drainage changes last time.
They put there's a drain in here that, on the curve. There was a pipe running by, and they just put another catch basin right above the pipe, and it's connected in.
So I don't know if you can see it, but there was, the existing drain was on the TD Bank curb line, and the pipe was going through to a manhole here, and then connecting the rest of the basins to this manhole and then exit. We put another catch basin on the south side of the entrance drive to pick up this water as well coming in. So it just worked out a little bit better, we thought, adding that basin to the plans. And then we discussed it a little bit last time, is we had the entrances in from Route 32, sidewalk to the building, front of the building. This Route 32 goes down, or heading south, so the building's obviously level. So in order for us to make grades for these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 entrances, we have to put steps in. We're proposing steps. This, in terms of handicap accessibility, this from 32, this walk is all accessible. You can access the building on the gable end here. You can come all the way around, access all the way around the building here as well. Our handicap parking is in the back. And again, that's obviously all handicap accessible as well. The building location was really set by the code. The code requires our front yard setback to be equal to or less than the buildings adjoining us. So that's what kind of set this streetscape, so to speak, which gives us very little horizontal distance to make up any grades whatsoever. So we're proposing stairs. And again, there are stairs within the Route 32 corridor, and the building exceeds, or meets or exceeds handicap, ADA accessibility.
And we don't have that plan with the steps.
What date is on that?
This is, you actually have that do you have these in elevation?
Last one I have is 9/17.
Yeah, I don't have a C102. I think C100 is all we have. Yeah, I don't know if you can actually see them. But this is, again, just in terms of elevation. And when we'll submit the final, we just updated the site plan. But again, just getting an idea what it would look like with the stairs in the
We
front.
don't have a plan showing the steps.
When we submit the narrative, you'll have the plan.
Right, but I think we're still reviewing whether or not the steps are a good idea.
Okay. Well, you'll have the plan.
It'd be helpful if we had a plan
Sure,
today
sure.
to look at it. Do you have it on that board right there?
We do. these are actually,
That walkway on the side, that requires that
so handicap, this is all,
on the other side.
all around. So from here to here, it's going to be great, but it's not going to not be ADA compliant.
Right.
But we do have enough distance to get, so we don't need the stairs.
And each one of these spaces has a front porch, in essence. It doesn't have a continuous sidewalk in front of each space.
No.
Is there a particular reason for that?
I'll just show you, I can bring the,
I have a plan. We received a plan. This says CVPM proposed site plan amendments.
Actually, you may be able to answer this
was
question.
provided electronically on October 31, 2019. And the one I have shows the steps in the front, and it's a revision 10, which is 9/27/19. I don't know all that was given to the board, quite frankly. I thought it was fully distributed. This shows steps in the front. It's a straight walkway in with a couple of steps. But you should have it.
We should, that's right, we
Yeah.
should. I agree. So I'm an advocate of not having steps in the front of the building, considering it was not that way before. And if, I don't understand why each store has its own little patio that you have to come up to, rather than having a continuous sidewalk in front of it.
I mean, we could have a continuous sidewalk in front of the building, and that's going to be an alternative. We thought that the individual steps aesthetically, or individual entrances look good off the street. They're more symbolic than actual. I mean, everybody's going to park in the back. There's really no off-street parking on Route 32 other than the 3 spaces in front of the TD Bank. And again, the stairs are not uncommon along the 32 corridor. A lot of the existing buildings have stairs leading up to the front door.
Yeah, the only file I have is the Word document and the parking analysis. So,
We'll have it
Yeah.
before.
is there a potential to have a sidewalk at the store level and allow the circulation to be,
That's an alternative.
sloped?
That's an alternative.
I'm talking to Eric.
Yeah.
Yeah, it is an alternative. I think the trick, as long as we can slope the grade from that sidewalk along the building accurately to the sidewalk on the street, so as to avoid a rail, because I don't think anybody's going to appreciate that.
Would it, if you had one central stair, like that was wider from the sidewalk to a platform, then landscaped either side of it in some way? I like a million ideas in my.
Well, that might work more from the north end, because that's pretty level in, and then go down and cascade down perhaps.
From the north, you can go, just stay right on grade.
You can, and then you'd have to maneuver along the building to match it, yes.
Right. So you can just stay right along the building. Got your glasses?
No, that's what I'm asking, if there's alternative to what has been drawn that would either create one central stair and a more cohesive link to Main Street, just right along the way there, all of those stores are at. And across the way where the municipal lot is, that's kind of annoying the way that entrance is set up, where you have to step up from the parking lot into the store. It's a bad detail. So, if we could see more drawings of that, would be great.
Yeah. So 2 feet.
Yeah, I think we could do that.
Anybody else? No, go ahead, Rick.
You previously had voted on a neg deck generally, but you have been now provided with a written neg deck, sort of summarizing your position on the reasons for the neg deck. So I think it would be prudent, and you all have a copy of it, we had provided that to the board, so I think it would be prudent for you to vote on adopting that written negative declaration. And the only other thing that I have is, given that there's still quite a bit of decisions for you to make with respect to the right turn only, with respect to the ADA compliance, with respect to the parking waiver, that it's really, I don't think, appropriate for you to authorize me to draft a resolution for the next meeting.
No.
Okay.
I'll make the motion to accept the next deck as drafted by council.
I'll second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. And then, so next time you're before us, the narrative and maybe one or two alternatives to just staircase that we go up to.
Yep.
So we can get an idea what it looks like.
On kind of another topic, I don't know if the board is able to entertain an aesthetic discussion regarding this building that was not part of the application.
I can't even hear what you're saying.
I'm checking to see if we
Can you talk into the microphone, please?
Yep.
So everybody can hear.
Yep. Hi, Barry Tarek, architect for the applicant. I didn't know if the board could entertain a quick discussion about a color change to the exterior of the building that's different than what was approved. If I can, we did not submit any documentation. I'm just checking to see if
Well,
it's
it's up to the board. The board has
Yeah.
discretion to go ahead and discuss it with you if you want. Obviously, they're not going to be making any decisions.
Without an application, I'm not willing to move forward with it tonight.
Okay.
So if you can get it for the next meeting, then we talk about it with other renderings and the use.
Okay.
Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you. IE, public hearing for proposed site plan for bed and breakfast to be located within an existing single-family home. Said property is located in the R1A zoning district at 35 Buena Vista Terrace and is known in the Village of Woodbury tax maps, section 227, block 6, lot 4.1 and 4.2. Good evening.
Good evening, Jason Pitangaro from Pitangaro and Doach, representing the applicant tonight. We've been before the board a number of times for this project at 35 Buena Vista Terrace. It's on lot 4.2, which is a 2.4 acre lot within the village. The applicant is within a zone that permits bed and breakfast use, and we're proposing to use the building in that fashion at this point. We have no actual changes that are proposed on site as far as physical changes to the site. It's served by water and sewer. It has capacity for both of those things. Existing landscaping and lighting is pretty inclusive throughout the site. There was some discussion last meeting about some restrictions on lighting, which the applicant is willing to include. And we're here tonight for a public hearing and address any questions we could.
Okay. Dennis, I don't think you...
Well, we've had full discussion on this. This is listed for a public hearing. We've made some comments on this in terms of circulation around the building, access, fitting into the neighborhood and the character of the area. We made some recommendations. They have included most of those on the plan. I think at this point, it's a public hearing to get the input from the public, unless you have any questions of me.
They may have any questions for Dennis or for the applicant before we go to the public? No. Anybody on the first row wishing to speak to this application? Anybody in the second row?
Good evening. My name is John O'Friel. I reside at 2 Buena Vista Terrace in Central Valley. First, I would like to note, I never received notice of this meeting. I live 3 houses down on the opposite side of the street. A neighbor had contacted me, and I went into the building department, and they were very cooperative and provided me with the information. This building, I believe, was cited for a violation just a few years ago for using it as a boarding house. The town permits them to run a business there with vans that are parked there. There is usually a minimum of 2 to 4, depending on the day of the week. I read the information that is in the disclosure here for the application, and the only thing I see mentioned is the 5 bedrooms that are going to be used. For all appearances, I do not believe anybody lives in that building. I've been to a lot of bed and breakfasts. I find it very difficult to believe that they can exist without employees. I don't know if any provision of the trucks coming in to pick up the laundry. They're going to serve a breakfast. There's got to be delivery trucks there. I don't know if anybody has considered the increase in the traffic. There's a pool on the premises, and I don't know, maybe I'm a little cynical, but to tell me that they're going to post a sign and say not to be used by the guests while the owner of the house is frolicking in the pool, I'm sure the first thing that will happen is a towel will be draped over the sign not to be used by guests. I believe it's an erosion of the character of the neighborhood. As I say, there's an existing business there now, and I believe that the municipality is aware of it. That's all I have to say.
Thank you, sir. Anybody else in the second row? Anybody in the third row?
Hello, I'm Judy Vaca. I live at 25 Buena Vista Terrace, right next door to the 35 property. And I didn't find out about this until Friday. And I know that many people on my street don't even know about this. They didn't get notified. I spoke to Mr. O'Friel, and I got some information that was given to me about it being a bed and breakfast. And I'm opposed to it, so I'll tell you right now. But I used to live in that house with my 4 siblings. And I know there is 5 bedrooms, as it used to be, and now you're telling me there's going to be 6. And when we were all getting ready, there's only 2 small bathrooms upstairs and 1 downstairs. So as a bed and breakfast, I don't know how you would use that. But more than that, since these people have moved in, there've already been a business going on. It's like a shuttle bus going back and forth. Not as many as when you
just address the board and not the applicant.
I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I am a little, I've lived on that street at least over 50 years. It's residential. It's always, you know your neighbors. I don't know who the heck's living next to me anymore. And I don't see anybody living there. So as long as you're telling me that the owner has to be on premises that's going to be living there, I doubt if that's going to be happening. I don't see anybody there now. So, I mean, there's many more reasons I could probably state if they're going to do this again. I was a little taken by surprise. And there is a beautiful pool there. I can't imagine that you're just not going to let people use it. And as far as lighting, I mean, I got a feeling that the only thing they want to do this bed and breakfast for is for the commons. And if you're going to walk to the commons, there is no lighting on that street or sidewalks to go to the commons. And I really, you know, there's lights on the corner of the house, just like anybody's house. I don't think it's additional lighting. I can probably think of other things, but I'm not sure. The thing that I also wanted to ask is that if this goes through and they decide to sell the house, is it going to be as a bed and breakfast for the next person that wants to buy it, or is it going to be?
The permit would be tied to the applicant.
So if they decide they want to sell, it would be a single-family dwelling again, like everything's supposed to be on that street?
Right, Rick? It would revert back to its original use, and any new owner would have to come back before the board.
Well, it's a little bit more complicated than that, but essentially that's how it goes. As long as it's being used, whether that's this owner or they sell it to somebody else and they still use the same use, they're subject to the same restrictions that you would put on here as well as the restrictions that are in the code. If they stop using it and there's a period of time where it's not being used, it obviously defaults back to what it was previously, what it could be used for. But at some point in time, that use that was approved but is now abandoned, whether or not somebody else would have to come in if now they wanted to use it again in 5 years or so, we'd have to look at the code as to whether or not this specific use lapses upon abandonment or whether or not it would continue.
The other question I had, it says they want 5 bedrooms. Does that mean they're going to have 5 guests at a time? So it means there'll be 7 cars. I guess they said they had to make a parking place for. So my privacy is gone, and my, just the fact that I have some peace and quiet would be nice. I moved on that street for a reason, to be residential, not to have a bed and breakfast with 5 people at a time. And I know that from what has been happening from day one is this hasn't been used as a single-family dwelling at all, as far as I can see. Thank you.
Thank you.
Just on a procedural note, I was just checking with Dennis, because I was checking with the code. There's actually no requirement in the code to send out individual notices.
Right.
It's only required to be published in the paper. However, as a matter of practice, the applicant is required to send it out, and there is a list of approximately 33 property lots that were sent notification with respect to this. So I don't know whether or not there's a problem with the mail or some other
What's the
requirement.
timeline on that, Rick? Like how far?
I don't have it here as to when these were sent out.
The notice was published Friday, November 1st in the Times Herald Record.
Right,
So
so that's what I'm saying. Is that when these go, the notices to the union purpose goes out on the same?
we'd have to ask Maria because usually she sends them out.
Thanks.
We can find out then. Anybody else in the third row? Anybody else in the back of the room? Anybody else in the room? Once, twice, 3 times. Make a motion to close the public hearing?
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Can we do the same that we did with the cell phone and leave it open for written comment?
If the board wants to.
If there's other residents that either didn't get the notice or weren't aware, then can we leave it?
You don't mind if I address the board?
Well, I think, first let me give the advice that she has requested. Yes, you can do it if you want to. It's not your typical practice, but you have done it on occasion.
Okay, I would like to just keep it open, or, well, we could close it, but have the written comment.
Yeah. But also realize that there's a clock running once you close the public hearing, so.
Yes.
Okay.
How does everybody else feel about that?
I'm in favor of written notice.
Okay, but do you want to close the public hearing and take the written notice, or keep the public hearing open?
Well, typically, it's really not appropriate to keep a public hearing open simply because of the opportunity that maybe somebody will come in. So I think it's been properly noticed, actually more than what's required under the code. These are the comments from the people that are here. So I think it's appropriate to close the public hearing. You can certainly go ahead and allow people to submit comments up to a specific date so that they know that they have to get in by a certain time. And you have to make sure that it gets on an agenda so that you don't have that 60-day lapse.
I think what we did with the cell towers, we waited till, we gave to the following Friday at like noon. It would be the 15th.
15? Okay, I'll make the motion that we accept written comment up until noon on Friday, November 15th.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay. Sorry.
Okay, so just to offer some clarification, the public hearing is closed. We're going to have a written comment that's accepted, and we'll get that from Maria or the building department, of course. Just to address some of the concerns regarding the building and its use. What we proposed is compliant. Again, there's nothing out of the ordinary here. There has been some restrictions. I don't know if the draft resolution was prepared, but I think we talked about that at the last meeting. It mentioned that there would be conditions for, of course, owner occupancy. It mentioned that there'd be conditions for proof of the owner being at the site and that being their residence, and similar things that were part of the concern of the board tonight. So I think those things could be adequately addressed in the resolution as was discussed at the last meeting. And as far as previous violations or anything like that, those are more building department matters. And as far as I know, if there were any violations, they had been addressed. And if there are any violations that occur in the future, the resolution and Gary will have the authority, the building department, to effectuate whatever needs to be done because of that.
But Jason, is there a business operating out of there now?
I've been to the premises. I don't find any business operating out of there. The time I went to the business, I met the owner with his single vehicle, which was a personal vehicle, and there was 2 other personal vehicles or personal-sized cars, let's say, parked on the site, and that's all that was there when I was there. I mean, I don't frequent the site.
But is the applicant here? Can he answer that question?
The applicant is here. I believe. Would you like to speak? Yeah. She just wants to know, so there's, I'm just going to help with answering your questions. Whether the business, are you operating any business out of this house at this point? You have your business that operates out of Brooklyn, I believe?
Mm-hmm. 就是说您在这里有没有那个 business 还是在别的地方有
Okay, my name is Guy. I live in 35 Provesta. Yeah, I have a business as a transportation between the city to Woodbury Commons, but I didn't use this house for any business so far. Yeah, only sometimes because I'm the driver, so sometimes I bring my vehicle to my house for just relax.
So you have shuttles that you drive, that you operate to Woodbury Commons, but sometimes you bring them to that house?
Yeah, sometimes I drive my vehicle to the house for relax in the daytime, yeah.
I think what he's saying is that when he drops off whoever he's transporting, he doesn't hang around Woodbury Commons all day because that could get old for somebody who's been there and has gone there quite a bit. So he drives like his work truck, like anybody else would, to this site here where he lives. So.
Yeah.
But
What's the question?
I'm assuming you're going to continue that business if you have the bed and breakfast. So how many more vehicles are going to be parked there?
None, because
No.
the bed and breakfast uses the 5 spots that are for the spaces and then the 2 spots which are for the owner. It may be that his car is that van, and honestly, it's not really much bigger than a Suburban or another vehicle that size, so.
But to that point, those are what's required for a typical bed and breakfast. What you are now proposing is that there's a shuttle component to that. And so the board certainly has to view the impacts of having a shuttle and whether or not more parking than would otherwise be the minimum parking, which is what you're talking about, would be required.
Well, I don't know that that's, I mean, I don't know that the shuttle component is included with the bed and breakfast component.
He just said that it was.
No, but if if anybody was brought to the bed and breakfast via shuttle, that would only reduce the use of cars by the people staying at the
But that's
bed.
something the board has to study. This is a different component than a typical bed and breakfast. It now includes a shuttle service as part of the business use.
Okay.
And therefore, the board has to determine. They may say that because of the shuttle use, you may not need all of that parking, all right?
Okay.
Or they may say that you need more parking. But they have to now, I think, get more information from the applicant with respect to the anticipated shuttle use, whether or not there's going to be one, whether or not there's going to be more than one. Those will be included as conditions, because we have to, whatever you want studied, they'll study, and they're not going to study everything, just what you say, and so whatever you want them to study, that's going to be conditioned to that limitation.
Okay, it may be the case that they no longer will bring the shuttle there. At this point, we'll wait for the comments from the public, and I will speak with the applicants, and if that is the case, we will notify the board that we're not going to be bringing the shuttle there even during the day when he is there.
Right, and if that's the case, then there'll be a limitation in the resolution that there shall be no shuttle service or any other mass transportation going to and from that is part of this business.
Understood, and we'll discuss that with them if that's what they choose to do.
Rick, this is like a new component to this. Would it be appropriate to rescind our motion and to reopen?
I think you should wait until you find out the contours of what they are going to add, and then you make that determination. For instance, you have had a public hearing opened, conducted, and closed based upon a certain set of circumstances. If they were to come back now and say, yes, we're going to have 3 shuttle buses every hour going back and forth, that substantially changes this. So then you have discretion to go ahead and reset a public hearing because it has been substantially changed. All right? But if they come back and just say there's 1 shuttle going back and forth, that may not be enough to go ahead and open a public hearing again because you can deal with that and you understand what the impacts may be.
Thank you. Anybody else have any questions for Rick or the applicant?
The only question I had was the date for the time of the written responses?
Noon on the 15th of November. Next Friday.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So there's, again, no authorization to draft any resolution. We're going to be hearing things, and you make decisions, because although I will tell you that with respect to the owner-occupied aspect of this, to ensure that the owner occupies it is fairly simple. I mean, we would require proof of residency change so that the person has to show proof of residency, driver's license, or other things that their residence now is here. What I do have to research, and I don't know the answer to, is whether or not, and it was related to an issue that was brought up, whether or not the owner has to be present when any guests are there. I don't know if that's a requirement. There's a requirement that it be owner occupied, right? So it's not some out-of-state person that doesn't have any idea what's going on here. The owner has to occupy it. But just like if you occupy your house and you have a business and you go out to the store, you go out to the movie theaters or something else, I don't know what the contours are, so we may have to explore that some more.
And just, I guess, for clarification of the public, for the public, if this does get passed, and there's always a resolution, and those resolutions have conditions about the operation of any business within Woodbury, if there's a notice of violation issued for that, then potentially their special permit could be revoked, right?
Yeah, there's a couple of things that would happen. Immediately what would happen is that if a violation was found, there could be a stop work order issued, or similar to a stop work order issue, whereby they would have to cease operations until they rectified something. They could also be brought to justice court for a zoning enforcement issue. And also, you would have the provisions in your typical special permit resolutions that if in fact there are violations to be found during the annual renewal period, that it might be brought back to you and you might change the conditions in a resolution.
Okay. Thank you. I just wanted to clarify that for the public, that there are recourses if this does get approved and there are violations on that property. Okay, next item is CAD Signs Corp. Aldi, public hearing for ARB approval of process sign panel to include both Aldi and Kohl's on the Woodbury Center monument sign. Said property is located at Center Drive and Route 32 and is zoned to the Village of Woodbury Tax Map Section 225, Block 2, Lot 1.12.
Good evening, Jonathan Ekman, representative for Aldi Real Estate, presenting the change from existing Kohl's panel at the top of the Woodbury Center pylon. We are only proposing to add the Aldi logo to the Averill Ave pylon, not the secondary pylon on the side of the building. So only asking for this on the main pylon at the top of the road. Changing from the existing Kohl's panel to what is proposed here, it's 65%, 35% split between the two approximately. And we are looking to get some roadside signage for the public as they travel along the road to make an appropriate decision and get into the appropriate lane to come shop at our store. So I know I've presented this before to some of you, and I will answer any questions and any public comments as well.
Do you have that sample, that plastic sample that showed?
I do not have any plastic samples, no.
It was something that showed the signs actually.
I believe on the back of this.
Okay, maybe I'm losing my mind.
No, there was a plastic sample last.
There was, right? Okay,
Yeah.
I'm not completely. Dennis?
Well, I mean, you've talked about this before. I'll just quickly say that there are a number of sign panels up here. You've limited the sign panels. And then when you start splitting signs and you start getting down into signs that become wordy and require that drivers take their attention away from the road, that's obviously a concern. So there were a number of revisions to the sign panels at Woodbury Center previously. We noted those in the report to you that we filed previously. The board noted a couple of things in those actions, saying that they thought this was the limit on the number of signs. They have taken a sign now and they've split it in two because, and quite frankly, these are two fairly large stores in the development. You think they'd want to be identified, but there are a number of sign panels up there now. And so the question before the board is, when does it get too busy? Take drivers' attention away from a road so they can try to read a sign. This is a fairly large building. You'd like to have it identified, but that sign is fairly busy right now, and that's what you've had discussion on. Previously, we provided you a report, not for this meeting, previously when this was discussed, and now it's a matter of having the public comment on this and determining whether, in fact, you believe that this is beneficial to the public or becoming just too wordy and taking drivers' attentions away from the road.
Does anybody have any questions for Dennis or the applicant before I go out to the public? Definitely for 1 second, sorry.
No, it's fine.
Anybody in the first row wish to speak on this application? Anybody in the second row? Third row? Anybody in the room at all? Once, twice? Three times. Motion to close the public hearing.
I'll make that motion.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Come back up.
Thank you.
I know the three of us got to see it last week, and this is yours. Okay. I know there's been lots of conversations about that sign, the changing of it, the splitting of it, adding an extra panel, I think was the last time we were here. I think personally, I think we've gotten to the point where what's on there is good. Adding additional signage, cutting the panels in thirds or halves. I think by the time you're doing, you're going to see it, you're going to be past it, and I personally don't see the benefit of splitting the Kohl's and the Aldi sign and putting them together. But how does everybody else feel?
Well, I agree, and hold on to the resolution of 2018, where we said that there would be a limit. So I maintain that we hold the line on that.
Joe?
Yeah, holding the line.
I agree. If someone knows that Aldi's is there, they can easily put it into their GPS or their phone. If they don't know it's there, I think the sign that's on the building itself is very visible. And I do not want to see that split. I think it's setting a dangerous precedent for the next door that wants another sign split.
Yeah, I agree with our committee's comments and our chairman's recommendations.
And I will offer a motion for what is it, a resolution of non-approval?
Disapproval.
Disapproval. So I'll make a motion for resolution of disapproval.
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Well, I'll see you again soon. If you don't mind me asking, more of a clarity for for Richard. The current pylon is capped at the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 panels or 8 tenants. The next time that you see me is going to be for option 2 that's in my lease with Kohl's, which will have on one side of the panel will be an entire Aldi panel. On the other side of the sign will be the Kohl's panel. So Aldi gets one side of the panel and Kohl's gets the other. This in my lease is option 1. This next one will be option 2. My question is, does the language allow for the 8 tenants? Does that change? Are we looking at it 8 tenants on one side and 8 tenants on the other? Or are we now talking that with the Aldi and the Kohl's, are we talking about 9?
Well, I can't give you that answer definitively because it was a restriction placed upon this board. Some of the members were the same, some were not. And it was really what their intent was when they did that. I believe, and this is just my interpretation of the intent was that it assumed that the sign would be the same on both sides and that they didn't want more than that number with respect to when you looked at the sign. They may not have a problem with your option 2, but that's something you need to address with the board.
Yeah, of course.
I would suggest, though, because if they go ahead and we draft a resolution of disapproval and they disapprove it, that's the end of your application.
Yep.
Right now you have to file a new application.
Yep.
If you want, you certainly can go ahead and withdraw ask the board to rescind that and simply come with a modified proposal, as a lot of applicants do. They come up and the board has certain things, so they said, all right, let me respond to that and I'll come up with something different.
Okay.
And that way, unless you need the turn down in order to get this other lease provision option.
No, I'll have them watch the video if they have any questions.
Okay. So would you like then to have the board, now I'm not saying the board has to do that, but I mean, if you want to, you can request the board to rescind their authorization to draft a resolution of disapproval, allowing you to come back with a modified plan.
Yes, I think that would keep things moving a little bit quicker.
It's up to the board. Yeah, they would have to have a new public hearing.
Yeah. Another public hearing because it'd be a new plan, right?
Yes,
So,
right, yeah. But it would not require him to now file a new application and be back before you, which is basically the same thing, but just a different sign. I mean, it's a whole different application, I would say that's what he needs to do, but this is really just a modification of the sign.
So I'll make a motion to rescind my motion for a motion of disapproval.
I'll second.
Sorry, Jess. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.
Bronken Man, 24 Catskill High Rail, discuss revised site plan, special permit and ARB for proposal shul and mikvah to be located within an existing single-family dwelling. This property is designated as a critical environmental area pursuant to SECA and is subject to village regulations for ridge preservation 1310-13. Said property is located at 24 Catskill High Rail, Central Valley, and is known on the Village of Woodbury Tax Map, Section 254, Lot 7, Lots 2.
Hello, Mr. Chairman. How is everybody tonight? Good to be here. Stephen Barshov, Saif Paget and Rizal for the applicant. Unfortunately, the technical consultants both could not be here tonight. Joel Mann's child is in the hospital. I don't think it's very serious, but he could not be here as a result of that, and his partner is also away. So I'm here to answer any questions. I think we are at the stage now where the board would consider the waivers that have been requested, but I'm not sure if that is exactly where the board is at. So I'm happy to answer questions that I can, and hopefully we can move this matter forward.
Dennis, you don't have any new, right, or do you?
I don't have a report on this. You had to wait for the 30-day lead agency period to elapse, so SECR remains to be concluded. This action, it's a determination of substantial burden. If they've established that, and there are a number of questions on that, in requested zone waivers, which relate to lot area, coverage, lot width, front yard, side yard, rear yard, parking. So you need to make a determination that, or whether a ZBA referral is needed, and I deferred to Rick for advice to you on those matters.
Okay, there's a couple of things here. One of which is that it is on the agenda to go ahead and discuss the waivers. And with respect to those waivers, and you can ask me some questions about how the substantial burden fits into it and what that really means. We've talked about it previously, but if you have any questions, I can give you some guidance on that. All of them are pretty straightforward, that they are subject to your waiver discretion, which is lot area, parking, lot coverage, lot width, and setbacks. They're all deficient, and they're also all subject to your waiver discretion. There is also a requirement with respect to landscaping, that there's certain landscaping that has to be required. That isn't specifically in your bulk table, and it's the bulk table that triggers the waiver provision. However, it is indirectly in your bulk table where it says, see these parking regulations. So I think that incorporation by reference really brings that back into the bulk table under these circumstances. And the specific one here is that if you have certain parking, it's not just landscaping generally, it's landscaping dealing with parking and adjacent properties. So it's a parking regulation, and therefore it is, in my opinion, part of the code, part of the bulk requirements and subject to the waiver. This is a little bit different, in my opinion, than the other types of bulk requirements in which they are requesting a waiver. Obviously, for instance, if the lot area, if you don't grant a waiver, that basically means that they can't have what they want, and so that clearly presents a substantial burden, all right, because they can't have it at all. And the court cases have said if it's a substantial, that if the result of not allowing them to do that means that they can't have the use, that's clearly a substantial burden because it eliminates the use. I think the same is true with respect to lot coverage, lot width, setbacks. Parking, I think it's a little bit different because different aspects can be done with respect to how to accommodate parking and whether or not it presents really a substantial burden with respect to the parking requirements. But the applicant, Mr. Barshov, representing the applicant, can go ahead and address that specific one. The other one is this landscaping. And although it is incorporated into the bulk table and subject to the waiver, the real issue on that is landscaping of a parking lot does that create a substantial burden? This isn't something where it just eliminates the use. It means they have to plant some trees and other things, which, in my opinion, it's difficult to try to show that that's a substantial burden on religion to be able to, a requirement to plant some landscaping around a parking lot. But the applicant can go ahead and address that, and this board can determine those things. But I think we should have that discussion. In addition to that, you were provided with a Part 2 of the EAF. We should go through that and make a determination of significance. And then finally, the thing that we have to do is that your next meeting is on November 20th. Because of the date that you close the public hearing and the number of days in a calendar, the 60 days to make a decision expires the day before your next meeting. So that we would need a waiver from the applicant. Otherwise, you'd have to make a determination now of a denial because you don't have all the information that, or decisions that you've made. But I imagine that the applicant can go ahead and extend that so that if everything else is satisfied, you'd authorize a drafting of a resolution, and it could be addressed on the 20th, and the applicant would waive that time frame so that that action could be taken on the 20th rather than the 19th. So Steve, if you want to address some of those issues.
Sure. If, Mr. Chair, is that okay? Okay. So first of all, as far as the waiver is concerned, of course, we're not going to make matters more difficult, especially over a day. As far as the landscaping is concerned, and I'll deal with that one first, my understanding from the technical consultants was that the requirement of the landscaping itself is not burdensome, but the fact is that if you put the landscaping in and you literally comply with the requirements of the code, it would diminish or impede the ability of the applicant to provide the parking that it is proposing to provide. So I believe that that is the essence of the concept of hardship. I think that the specifics of it, though, and if I remember this correctly, and please the board can correct me if I'm wrong, that there was to have been a submission from the applicant's technical consultants precisely on that point, exactly how the landscaping would impede the parking, and I don't believe that that material has come in because of the holidays and now there being some unavailability of the consultants. I thought that they would have that for you tonight. So that will come in very short order, and we'll be able to demonstrate that. I'll put in a submission to go along with it to connect the dots, Rick, but the technical aspects of it will be demonstrated in that plan. But that's the concept of the hardship, is that it interrelates back to the parking. And as far as the parking itself is concerned, I'm not going to, I think the board is quite well aware of the whole business with the UTB parcel itself and why we're here to begin with, which is originally there was another site on which there would have been plenty of parking, and that is bound up in a dispute with the village, having nothing to do with the planning board, as to whether or not the owner of that parcel can make it available for parking. The village has taken the position, again, not the planning board, but the village itself has been taking the position that that property is not able to be used for parking. Hence, we now have to try to squeeze the parking in onto this site. There is parking available on the street. We're trying to provide as much parking off-street as we can. But it is impossible to provide the required amount of parking on-site because of the size of the lot. So that's pretty much the basics as far as the parking is concerned.
If I could just address one related aspect to that.
Sure.
And yes, you're correct. We need that information in order for the board to make the decision on the parking, including but not limited to the landscaping issue. That would have had to have been in today in order for you to be on the November 20th planning board meeting. So this won't be before the board until the meeting after the 20th, and it'll be later if, depending upon when you get No, the
Understood.
submittal, and the submittal has to be in 2 weeks before the meeting.
Understood.
Okay.
Yeah.
Concern I have is going to revolve around, majority is going to be the parking. The 3 times I went and I visited the site, I went early morning and I went late in the day. One time I counted 17 cars. They were double, triple parked in the driveway. Some were parked on the adjacent lot next to it. There were 14 cars, and then there were 13 cars parked on the streets in front and side. I know we had talked about making provisions for no parking in that on one side of the street. I believe that was going to be a part of the resolution. It's a lot of people trying to squeeze into a smaller house, smaller property. And, I know during certain holidays when it's going to be very busy that there'll be no driving, but I'm pretty sure during morning and evening services, they drive, right? You drive before you go to work and kind of stop on your way home.
You are allowed to drive on those other days.
Yeah. And that's when I stopped by, that's when I saw all the cars. It's a neighborhood just like any other neighborhood, and to me it'd be different if it was a birthday party. It happened once every now and again, but
Mr. Chairman, one thing I will suggest, I'm saying this with a slight smile on my face, but I'm going to just say what reality is. Look, the village doesn't have any need for the UTB parcel. There's no public infrastructure on there. What was proposed is gone. It would be really nice if you as chair and if the board, as a board, were to adopt a resolution to say to the elected officials and whoever else is making this decision that the availability of that parcel would solve all of these problems for this shul and would prevent this board from having to make difficult decisions. If there was an iota of public purpose that was there for the retention or the claimed retention of this UTB parcel, I would not be making this request. But there is zero, absolutely zero. So I feel badly. I feel badly that this board is being put in a position of having to debate how much parking should be squeezed onto this site for no good reason. And I don't know the way around that. I've tried to deal with the village attorney, not with Rick but his partner, on this issue, and frankly, I have gotten absolutely nowhere. I've been told title is the village's, and that's it. Well, I've held back from litigating because I'm not really looking to do this by litigation, but if I have to, I will. But the real practical solution to this problem is what the applicant wanted to do to begin with, which was to use that piece of property that nobody else needs. And I don't understand why we have this problem. But in lieu of that, yes, you're going to have to face these parking issues, and I appreciate the number of people that's there. That's why we had proposed to have the parking on this other site.
I might have missed it, but I didn't see the smile part of any
I'm
of that.
smiling now.
Well, you've made your request. The village board has exercised what it believes is its right, based upon my advice, to go ahead and accept the prior irrevocable offer of dedication. They do believe that there is a need for utility purpose for that parcel, even though it is not presently being used for utility purposes. If the planning board wants to request the Board of Trustees to take different action, they can do that. But the Board of Trustees has accepted that property for purposes that they believe and I believe are legal and appropriate.
I'll talk about being put in a rock in a hard place.
I mean, I can't tell the board that you shouldn't ask the Board of Trustees for something, and so if you want to ask them, you can ask them. And if you don't think that that's your role to go ahead and ask the board to do that, to give up some property that it has taken title to, it believes, then you don't do it, that's all.
Well, I don't think it's our place to do that, to ask them. So I'll take that stand. It's not our place.
If that's the pleasure of the board, I respect that, I understand that, but that is the explanation for the hardship and the issues, okay?
Yeah, and you understand that we're in between, you know, we have to look at the application as presented in front of us right now.
I do.
And I will agree with my board. I don't want to set a precedent that this board is going to start going back to the village and asking.
That's okay. And
change their
I get it. And look, if we are able to navigate through this process and come up with the best solution that's possible in terms of parking, but I just want it to be clear to the board that we are all between a rock and a hard place. And while I appreciate what Rick has been saying, the fact is that no one has indicated any present need for that property for any purpose whatsoever. There's the public, and I have that in writing. So bottom line is that we're all in between a rock and a hard place, but you ask about the hardship and why there is hardship, that's the reason.
Understood. Well, I said my piece on parking.
No, it has to, I mean, it's clear that that's an issue, and probably the most pressing issue that has to be addressed here. And it's wrapped up in the waiver issue that you have. I think it's clearly something that's subject to your waiver. Of course, you could waive things in their entirety or partially. So there has to be particulars and the contours of the waiver to allow whatever you believe is the best option, given the circumstances that you're faced with here. But you have to decide how much parking there should be on site and what, if any, reasonable restrictions there ought to be with respect to off-site, so that clearly they're not parking illegally or other things like that. There may be a request to the Board of Trustees to place for the, this is...
No, it's a private road.
Yeah.
It's part of the original sign.
But there is also part of the approval was that the original applicant, and it's still valid, gave permission to the village to go ahead and enforce traffic issues on the private roads, and under village law, the planning board had the right to request that, and the applicant, my understanding, is granted that. So there might be some ways to sort of mitigate this issue of parking, but it's an issue that needs to be addressed, and I think it needs to be addressed from a numbers point of view and not just generally about parking.
Well, how does everybody else feel? We have two substantial waivers, right? We have the overall structure, which is lot coverage, setbacks, and then we have the parking, right, Rick? Or is it each one of those is separate? Like setback, lot coverage, each one of those is a separate waiver?
Yes. I think to be clear, just in case you might have a divided board on one versus the other.
Okay. Well, I guess we'll take it one by one.
You're going to get another submittal, which will help inform your decision on the parking aspects. So if you wanted to postpone that issue and address the other deficient bulk requirements, I think that you could do that now if you felt so inclined to do so. That is the lot area, lot coverage, lot width, and setbacks. You have a proposed plan. Most of it is a present building.
So for lot area, they're required to have 43,560 square feet. They're providing 19,620 square feet.
Actually, I think they're required to have residential of 15,000 and a place of worship of 43,560, if I have that right.
I'm going by what's on the plan, so there's something you need to...
Okay, is this strictly a house of worship and that's all? That's the only use?
I believe